Hi, everybody. I am Dr. James Smith. I am a licensed professional counselor, and I've been a licensed professional counselor for a little over 20 years. There's a topic that comes up when I work with people in therapy. It comes up fairly often, and it's about this voice that exists inside of us. And I wanted to share this information with you in the hopes that it could be helpful. So without further ado, we're going to be talking about healing the pathological critic. So when we talk about healing the pathological critic, we're really going to be talking about the self. We have to kind of start with questioning, what does that even mean? What is the self, right? So, when we think about the self, we're thinking about it in terms of like, I want to just be myself. I want to be my authentic self. I want to self-actualize, are words that you'll hear. But what does that even mean? What is the self, right? So I envision that the self is the sense of my own identity that rests on three legs. So it's like a three-legged stool. And the first leg of the stool is self-worth. Self-worth is the value that I believe I have. So that then leads us to the question of, what makes a person valuable, right? What makes a person valuable? And I'll pose this question to people. I'll even pose this question to people in the mental health field. And it's just so interesting, the answers that I get to this question, because invariably people are going to answer this question by saying something like, well, what makes us valuable is what we do, or it's what we accomplish, or it's what we contribute, right? And that makes us valuable. So that always leads me to the question that, then if our value as a person is based on what we do, does that mean a person who can do more than I can is more valuable than I am as a human being? And that really shouldn't sit right with us. Or the idea that a person who accomplishes more than I've accomplished, is that person more valuable than me as a human being? Or what about people who contribute more than I'm able to contribute? Does that make them more valuable as a human being than I am? Right? That those questions kind of make us feel icky. And what about people who can't do anything? Right? Maybe they have some kind of severe disability and they can't do anything. They can't accomplish anything. They can't contribute anything. Does that mean they're worthless? Right? And that should really make us feel kind of queasy inside. Any answer to the question of what makes a human being valuable, other than the idea that a human being is valuable simply because the human person exists, commodifies the human person. And what do I mean by that? It means it turns the person into something whose value can go up or down. It turns them into a commodity. It turns them into a thing that is worth a dollar amount. It turns them into a thing that can be bought and ultimately be bought and sold. And this is the source of every single atrocity against human people that has ever happened, is the idea that certain human beings are worth less than other human beings. The only place that can lead us is to atrocity, right? So it should make us feel queasy inside to think that a human person's value is based on what they do or what they've accomplished or what they can contribute. Well, then where does our value rest, right? The only answer that really leads us to a place probably that we want to go is that our value is based on our existence. And that's it. Human beings have value simply because they exist. There's no other reason. That means that our value is inherent to us. And not only is it inherent to us, but it's also infinite. Thich Nhat Hanh, the great mindfulness psychologist who helped to bring mindfulness into Western culture, was once asked, "What is the beginning of self-love?" And he talked about, his response was really interesting. He said, people value what is rare. And when we get in touch with how wonderfully rare we are, we can't help but see our own value and to love ourselves. People love what is rare. So, you take a certain baseball player breaks into the ranks of the major leagues and gets 10,000 baseball cards made. But over time and over decades, many of those get destroyed, they get torn up, they fade, they get thrown out in the trash, whatever happens, to the point where maybe out of that 10,000 baseball cards that were distributed, there might be 100 of them left. And now they're incredibly rare, right? And because they're so rare, and because that baseball player's talent was so rare, right? Then that card becomes incredibly valuable. There are baseball cards out there worth millions of dollars because they are so rare and the talent of the player was so rare, right? We put value on what is rare, right? Now, let's think about this. In the entire history of the cosmos, since the moment the universe came into being, there has never been another being exactly like you. And there's never been another being exactly like me. And once we're gone from this plane of existence, whatever that looks like, whatever you believe in, happens at that moment of transition we call death, right? Whatever happens, once we're gone from this plane of existence, um, there will never be another being exactly like me or exactly like you. So you are infinitely unique. There's only one of you. And because you are infinitely unique, your value is infinite. It is infinite. So our value is inherent. We have it simply because we're born. It is infinite. It cannot be measured. And it is absolute. It cannot be changed. No matter what you do, no matter what you have ever done, no matter what you ever will do, your value cannot change. So, what makes a human being valuable? That they exist. How valuable is the human being? Infinitely valuable. And can that value ever be diminished? No. You are valuable simply because you exist. Your value is infinite and your value is unchangeable. And I would challenge you to start believing that. Start acting like you believe that, right? Start acting like you have value. That's self-worth, and it's the first leg of the stool of the self. The second leg of the stool of the self is what we call self-efficacy. And this is what I think I can do. And many times this is confused with that first leg of self-worth, because even in the answer you say, what gives a human person their value? What they can do. No, what they can do is their self-efficacy, right? That's not their value. Those two things are separate from one another. So there are certain things that I can do, and I can do them very well, and then there are other things that I can't do at all. But that doesn't, just because I can't do certain things doesn't mean I'm worthless as a human being. It doesn't mean I have no value. It just means I can't do certain things, right? So, for example, I've been riding motorcycles since I was a teenager. I love riding motorcycles, and I'm really good at it. I'll say with all humility, I am really good at riding motorcycles. I can thread a needle with a motorcycle. So if a friend of mine calls me up and says, "Hey, I had some work done on my motorcycle. It's 2 towns over. I can't go pick it up. Would you mind driving out there and picking it up and riding it back for me? And then, later tonight, maybe we can drive back out there and get your car." I'd be like, "Absolutely, I can do that. That sounds like a great time," right? Because I'm confident. I know I can do that. If a friend called me and said, "Hey, my airplane is having some work done on it at the airport in Terre Haute, Indiana. Would you mind driving out there and flying my airplane back for me?" I'd be like, You better ask somebody else to do that because I don't have any experience or knowledge or skills in flying a plane, right? So in one instance, I have really high self-efficacy. It's something that I've done. I have a lot of experience in it. I have knowledge about it. The other thing, I have low self-efficacy. I don't have any knowledge about it. I don't have any skills. I've never done it before. But just because I can't do one thing that my friend asked me to do doesn't mean I'm worthless as a human being. It just means I can't do that thing. So this is self-efficacy, what I think I can do, right? And the third stool of the leg is called self-concept. And this is who I think I am. So if you were to ask me, "Jamie, who are you?" Right? I'm going to answer that question in only one of two ways. The first way is I'm going to start naming qualities that I have. So I would tell you, like, I'm patient, I'm kind, I'm empathic, I'm intelligent. I think I am. But I might also tell you that I can come across as arrogant. I can be arrogant. I can be abrasive with people at times. So not every quality I name is necessarily a desirable quality, right? But I'm going to name these qualities that I have. The other way I'm going to answer that question is by naming social roles that I have in my life. And so this would be for, like, example, "Jamie, who are you?" And I'd tell you, "Well, I'm a husband, I'm a father, I'm a therapist, I'm a friend, um, I'm an employee," right? So those are the kinds of things I would tell you. But here's the catch to that. All of these words have meaning. So if I tell you that I'm patient, well, that word has meaning. What is the meaning of that word, right? What does it mean to be patient, right? So if I'm driving my car and I get behind somebody at a red light and the light turns green and that person doesn't go, how long do I have to sit there without honking my horn at them to be considered patient? 3 seconds, 5 seconds, 10 seconds? Should I not honk my horn at them at all? Right? So what does it mean to be patient? And different people are going to have different definitions of that. That's why sometimes, like, one time, I was in traffic. I was in traffic, and my wife was talking to me, and I made an observation about traffic, and my wife reflected, "Man, you're being really impatient today." But to me, I thought I was just making an observation, but to her, my observation came across as being impatient, right? And so, um, how do we know, right? What does that word mean, right? And the same is true with these social roles. Like, if I tell you that I'm a husband, well, what does it mean to be a husband? And where did that definition come from? Where did I learn the definition of what it means to be a husband, right? I tell you that I'm a father. Well, what does it mean to be a father? What's that word mean, right? These things, when we start defining these words, we start living them out more intentionally. And that's really important. So as I think about the self, I want to think about the words that I use to describe myself. What qualities do I have? What social roles do I play? And what did those words mean? Right? And if I can really define those words and start living them out intentionally, then I can be much healthier in my relationships. So, for example, my children have a definition of the word father that includes the idea that I'm an ATM, that they can walk up and hit the right buttons. I'm going to spin out spit out $20 in cash to them, right? That is not part of my definition of being a father, right? But this is what happens. We have different definitions, and this is where conflict comes from, because now they're expecting me to do this, and I'm expecting myself not to, right? And if they get mad, they get mad. They're like, "Hey, I need 20 bucks." I'm like, "Well, where are you going to get it?" Right? And then they get mad at me because I'm not willing. Part of my I define part of my role as a father as teaching my children financial responsibility. I'm very willing to give them money if I see them using money responsibly, but if I think they're going to use it irresponsibly, then I would be violating my own definition of being a father if I were to give them money. You see? And so that's what the definitions do. They set up responsibilities and expectations and boundaries for our behaviors, right? And we have to understand that other people aren't going to have those same definitions. That's kind of that's where we need to negotiate a little bit, right? But this is the idea of the self. The idea of my identity rests on these three things: my sense of self-worth, my value as a human being is inherent. I have it because I exist. It is infinite because I am infinitely unique in the universe, and it is absolute. It cannot change, right? It is my sense of self-efficacy. It's what I believe I can do and what I can't do. It's also my self-concept, which is who I think I am, using the words I use to describe myself, but on a deeper level, what do those words mean, right? So, where does this sense of self really come from? Well, our sense of ourself, comes from what we call primary relationships. Primary relationships are those relationships in which we integrate feedback we receive from others into how we think about ourselves. And so an example of this would be, let's say that I go to the grocery store and I get my groceries and I walk up to the checkout counter, right? And I put the groceries on the checkout counter, and the teenager that's checking out my groceries, right? Just like, "Did you find everything okay?" And I'm like, "Whoa, okay, uh-oh," right? And then they're just scanning my groceries, slinging it, scanning my groceries, slinging it, scanning, right? And they're getting after "You need to hurry up," the person bagging the groceries. "You need to hurry up, you're falling behind." And I'm going, holy cow. And I'm thinking to myself, boy, she's having a bad day, right? And then I pay for my groceries and tell her I hope her day gets better, and grab my groceries, and I get in the car, I drive home, and I get home, I bring the groceries in, I start putting them away in the cabinets, and my wife walks in. She just elbows me out of the way, right? I'm like, holy cow. And she starts slinging stuff into the cabinets. She picks up the milk, shoves it into the refrigerator, and she's grumbling under her breath the whole time. And I think to myself, whoa, what did I do that made her so upset? Because my wife is a primary relationship. The person checking out the groceries, that's not a primary relationship. So when I see that kind of grumpy, maybe mildly aggressive behavior from the person checking out the groceries, I think, whoa, she's having a bad day. But when I see that same type of behavior from my wife, I say, what did I do that upset her? So I'm taking this behavior of my wife and I'm integrating it into what I think about myself. Why? Because my wife is a primary relationship with me. So in primary relationships, our sense of self is formed. These ideas, my sense of my self-worth, my sense of self-efficacy, my self-concepts, right? These things are formed in these primary relationships, right? And with the sense of self develops a self-critic. And when we hear that term self-critic, we'll often go, oh, wait a minute, whoa, why would I want to be critical of myself? But that's not what the self-critic is, right? It's important that we understand what the self-critic is. The healthy self-critic does three things, and it does them. It's incredibly important that it does them. The first thing it does is it maintains my sense of self-concept by helping me understand um, the roles that I have and the qualities that I want to manifest in the world, right? That how which ultimately that defines my boundaries, my responsibilities, my expectations, right? It helps me understand what those things are. So, I'm not going to share with my friends the same way that I share with my wife because I'm my wife's husband. And that has boundaries, it has responsibilities and expectations that are different than the boundaries and responsibilities and expectations I have with my friends, right? I'm not going to expect the same things from them. I'm not going to expect the same things from myself in each of those circumstances. The same is true as a father, right? I'm going to I'm going to have a higher level of responsibility. I'm going to have certain boundaries with my children, and I'm going to have different boundaries with other people's children because I'm not their father, right? And that's really important to understand. And my self critic is what helps me understand that and helps me stay within the confines of those boundaries. It helps me live out that role in a way without stepping over the boundaries, right? To make sure that I'm doing those things successfully, right? The other thing my healthy self critic does is it maintains my sense of self efficacy by helping me stay within my areas of competency. And so, my healthy self critic, my in-laws were talking about changing out the motor of an air conditioner unit one day. I don't know the first thing about that. I don't know anything about that at all. But my in-laws are very mechanically inclined and they can understand that stuff. So they're talking about changing out this motor of this air conditioner unit, and I'm sitting there and my self-critic says to me, Jamie, you have a PhD in counselor education and supervision. You don't know the first thing about air conditioner motors. So you need to keep your mouth shut, not say anything about this, and just listen. And you might learn something, right? So that's what it does. It keeps me in my areas of competency. My healthy self-critic is what's going to tell me, yes, I can go get your motorcycle from the other town and ride it back, or no, I can't go get your airplane and fly it back here, right? That's what my healthy self-critic does. It keeps me within my areas of competency. And the last thing my healthy self-critic does for me is it helps me maintain my sense of self-worth by recognizing that I am not the mistakes that I've made. I am not the mistakes that I've made. Here's a little secret to life for you. Um, the secret to life is this: mistakes are the norm, not the exception. Everything that any of us have ever learned to do, we learned to do it by making mistakes at it. And it's okay to make mistakes. And making a mistake doesn't mean that you're worthless at something or that you're bad at something or that you have no value in something. It means that you're learning something. If you're not making a mistake, you're not learning, right? And eventually what happens, you make enough mistakes, and then you get to the point where you're able to do something competently with fewer mistakes, not with zero mistakes, but with fewer mistakes. You want to minimize your mistakes, right? As you learn, you minimize your mistakes. You get really good at something, right? And then you have a really strong sense of self-efficacy. But we are not the mistakes we've made, right? We're going to make mistakes. We have made mistakes, and that's okay. That doesn't affect our sense of self-worth. And when I'm new at something, I should expect to make mistakes at it as I grow and I learn and I develop new skills, right? So it helps me understand that I am not the mistakes I've made, and it helps me understand that my value is not dependent on what I do. My value is not dependent on what I do. I am inherently, infinitely, and absolutely valuable, no matter what I do, no matter what I do. So that's what my healthy self-critic does. It helps me understand these terms I use for my self-concept and the boundaries and the responsibilities and the expectations. If I say I'm going to be patient, what's the boundary? What is the responsibility? What is the expectation of being patient? And it helps me stay in that. Hey, Jamie, don't honk your horn. You're wanting to be patient. So learn to wait well, right? That's when I think about patience, that's how I define it. Getting really good at waiting, right? Um, but so it helps me do that with my self-concept. It helps me with my self-efficacy by helping me understand what my areas of competency are and what they are not, right? And it helps my self-worth by helping me separate my value from what I'm doing. It separates those things, doesn't make one contingent on the other. All right. So this is what the healthy self-critic does as it develops through these primary relationships. Problem is that sometimes that healthy self-critic can get wounded. The wounding of the healthy self-critic. So what do we mean by that? In our primary relationships, my healthy self-critic can get wounded. And it gets wounded when those primary relationships themselves are unhealthy. Or maybe a person that is a primary relationship in my life is wounded themselves. And so, the saying, hurt people, right? And when this happens, my healthy self-critic gets wounded, it gets sick, and it turns into what we call the pathological critic. And there are several ways that this can happen, right? That the pathological critic can turn, or the healthy self-critic can turn into a pathological critic. And the first thing it does is when, like, matters of taste, preference, prudential judgment, just judgment, good judgment, right? Um, just matters of personal preference. They get weighted down with morality. So what do we mean by that? What we mean by that is like when people might say to someone, God, why would you wear that? Right? When somebody says that, what they're communicating to the person is, hey, you're wrong for what you're wearing, right? Why would you put your hair that way, right? God, how could you eat that? Why would you do that, right? And it's a matter of just simple preference. It's a matter of taste. It's a matter of judgment, right? But it's been given this moral weight and it's communicated to the person that they're wrong for having that particular preference or having that particular taste or making that particular decision, which really was not a moral decision, right? When that happens, the person in a primary relationship, the person's integrating that feedback into how they think about themselves. And what they start thinking about themselves is that I am wrong, not I made a wrong decision or these clothes are not a good fit, right? But I am wrong in my being. And when that thought begins to form, the healthy self-critic starts getting sick and starts to develop into the pathological critic. Another way this happens is when caregivers fail to uh, make the distinction between a behavior and a person, right? And so, what would this look like? This would look like as if a child is being raised, and the child does something, misbehaves in some way, and the parent looks at them and goes, "You're a bad boy. You're a bad girl," right? You're making a statement about the person and not about the misbehavior. Or it's a critical thing that a spouse may say to their husband or wife, right? Like, man, you're a lousy husband, or why are you being so lazy, right? The person is saying something about the person and not about the behavior, right? So a wife who's been working all day, right? And she's tired and she comes home, and then the husband comes home from work and he expects a meal to be on the table, but she's tired and she just hasn't cooked anything. And the husband looks at her and says, "God, you're lazy. Why get up and cook something?" Right? That is a failure to distinguish between the person and a behavior. You're making an accusation about the person. It's when you might say to somebody, "What's wrong with you?" Right? Because they did something that rubbed you the wrong way. "What's wrong with you?" You're not making a distinction between the person and their behavior. Their behavior may have rubbed you the wrong way. That doesn't mean there's anything wrong with the person, right? But that's what you've said. And if it's a primary relationship, that person's going to receive that feedback and integrate it into how they think about themselves. And the wife begins to think about herself as lazy. The child begins to think about himself as a bad boy, or think about herself as a bad girl, or the person starts to think about themselves as, "There's something wrong with me," right? And when that happens, the healthy self-critic will get sick and turn into a pathological critic. Another way this happens is the frequency of forbidding gestures. So what does this mean? This means that a person who lives in a hypercritical environment, that no matter what they do, a person's going to find fault with it. Um, this is the hypercritical spouse who just nitpicks their spouse about every little thing, right? And it's the hypercritical parent where the kid might be in the living room on the couch, and the kid's laughing and having a good time, and the parent just keeps telling them, "Be quiet, be quiet, be quiet." Right? So the kid withdraws and goes into their room, and then the parent comes banging on the door going, "What are you doing in here? You need to get out here." Right? So no matter what the kid does, they feel like whatever they do is wrong. Self-efficacy. Whatever I do is wrong. Everything I do is wrong. And that affects a person's sense of self-efficacy, that sense of self. And when that happens, the healthy self-critic starts to get sick. I can't do anything right. And when that thought forms, the healthy self-critic gets sick and becomes the pathological critic. Very closely related to this one is the consistency of forbidding gestures. And this is particularly true with young children, because young children literally don't have the brain capacity to be able to tell the difference um, between contexts. And so something that is okay when they're goofing off at home is not okay in public, right? And so, but they're doing it at home, and they're getting lots of laughs for doing it, but then they do it out in public and they're told to sit down and shut up. That's inappropriate. Right? And the child is like, "Whoa, what just happened here? This was okay at home. I don't know what's going on," right? Because the child literally doesn't have the capacity to understand that there's certain behaviors that you can do at home when you're goofing off, and that probably shouldn't be done in public, right? And they can't make that distinction. So one piece of advice that I give to parents is that whatever behavior you expect your children to have in public, they should you should reinforce at home, right? You should expect your children to act at home the way you want them to act in public, because the child, and especially very young children, cannot make a distinction between those two contexts. So, but what happens is the child, if something is okay here but not okay here, the child, because it can't make that distinction, is left guessing. And when they guess wrong, they get punished. And when they get punished, they receive that feedback and they integrate it into themselves and think there's something wrong with me. I don't understand. I can't understand this. I must be stupid. And now the healthy self-critic is turning pathological. Right? Another one is how often and the degree to which misbehavior, forbidding gestures, we forbid misbehavior, right? But how often that's done through aggression and violence or through withdrawal, right, of affection. And so this is really important. So if the person's violent and aggressive, then the child's sense of safety and their sense that they're able to keep themselves safe gets attacked, right? And if they can't keep themselves safe, then the world becomes a very scary place. And their healthy self-critic turns pathological. And the other side of that coin is that somebody withdraws, they give the cold shoulder, they stonewall the person. I'm not talking to you, I'm not saying anything to you, right? And I'm just going to give you the silent treatment. And when that happens, the person begins to think that they're unlovable and their healthy self-critic turns pathological. And the last way that I want to talk about the healthy self-critic turning pathological is in trauma. So I worked with a lady one time who had driven for 30 years at least and never had a single car accident. And then she was involved in a very serious car accident. Thank goodness there were no injuries in the car accident, but it was a very, very serious accident. And it was the only accident she ever had. She didn't even cause it. She got the whole thing. She worked through the process. She got the insurance payout. She went and bought another car. But every time she approached the car to drive it, she would go into nearly a state of panic because she didn't believe that she could drive a car safely. So that single accident, that very serious accident, attacked her sense of self-efficacy and made her believe that she was not capable of driving the car effectively, right? Sense of self-efficacy. I can't do this anymore, right? And so her healthy self-critic, which used to tell her, hey, go for a drive. She'd drive everywhere, drove years, never had an accident, suddenly starts telling her, you can't do this, right? You're incapable of this. So that's the other way. Trauma can affect our sense of self, and it attacks the very sense of self. So when this happens, the healthy self-critic becomes pathological. So my healthy self-critic will critique my behaviors. Jamie, do this, don't do that, right? It's behaviorally focused. My pathological critic criticizes me as a person. Jamie, you're too stupid. You're incompetent. You're not likable. You're not lovable, right? Jamie, you're worthless. That's the kind of thing that the pathological critic will say to us. It's not about my behavior and what I'm going to do, what I'm not going to do anymore. It's about me as a person. My healthy self-critic helps to ensure my safety. It keeps me within my area of competency, right? So that I'm not stretching, so I'm not stepping way out where it would be dangerous for me to fly that plane back to Terre Haute. My healthy self-critic says, hey, don't do that, right? You can do this, you can't do that, right? But the pathological critic undermines my sense of security. So what it does is it tells me that I can't do things that I know that I can, even things that I'm really good at. My pathological critic, if my friend called me and asked me to ride his motorcycle back from 2 towns over, uh, my pathological critic would kick in and say, "You better not. You're going to have a wreck. You're going to have a wreck. It doesn't matter the fact that I've ridden a motorcycle for, 40 years almost, and I'm really good at it. My pathological critic will be telling me, you can't do that. You're going to wreck it. You're going to ruin everything, right? So it undermines my sense of safety by attacking things, even things that I know I'm good at. My healthy self-critic helps me stay within my areas of competency. Jamie, keep your mouth shut when your in-laws are talking about changing that air conditioner motor. Just listen and learn, right? If they have a question about mental health or something like that, you jump right in, man, you got that. But you don't know anything about this. So just stay within your areas of competency. My pathological critic undermines my self-efficacy. You're not good at anything, Jamie, so just keep your mouth shut all the time, right? Don't say anything ever, right? My healthy self-critic helps me identify social norms and whether or not I want to conform to that social norm. So my healthy self-critic is going to say, hey, here's the social norm, and here are your values, right? And the things that you value, the things that are important to you, don't quite line up to that social norm. So maybe you shouldn't go along to get along here. You might need to stand up here and at least not participate, at the very minimum, not participate in what's going on socially, right? So my pathological critic threatens me if I don't conform, and it also might keep me from conforming, right? So it might tell me, you're not likable enough to be different. You need to go along. And then I think in my head, well, they're doing stuff I don't really agree with, right? And my pathological critic says, you better go along if you're going to fit in, because if you don't, they're never going to invite you back. You're not likable enough to be different, right? Or my pathological critic might tell me, you know what? You're not likable enough to fit in. So don't even try. Don't even try to fit in. Just avoid it altogether, right? And so my pathological critic really makes me feel isolated and alone, right? My healthy self-critic supports my self-worth in a balanced way. It supports my self-worth in a balanced way. What it does is it tells me I am not the mistakes I've made. My value is not based on what I do. So it's okay to make mistakes and you learn from those mistakes. But my pathological critic, it communicates to me that I'm worthless, that I have no use, that everybody'd be better off without me. So these are the distinctions between the healthy self-critic and the pathological critic, right? So as we move along, we're going to talk about the internal dialogue that starts happening when the pathological critic is active. So somebody comes to me and they say, hey, you got a minute? And man, my pathological critic is activated. Great. Now what did you do? Right? Because my pathological critic is telling me that I can't do anything. I'm a failure, right? No matter what I do, it's going to end in disaster, right? So, and what I have to do is I'm in a state now where I'm trying to defend myself against this internal voice, right? The person says, hey, you got a minute? Because they're wanting to invite me to lunch with the team, right? This is a colleague from work wants to invite me to lunch with the team, and my pathological critic kicks in and goes, great, now what did you do? And that puts me into this state of defensiveness, right? So whenever we're experiencing defensiveness, that is a huge red flag that my pathological critic is active. So this person says, hey, you got a minute? Pathological critic kicks in. Great, now what'd you do? And I look at the person and I'm like, what are you going to tell me I did wrong this time? And that guy's like, inside his head, he's going, I wanted to invite you for lunch, but there's no way I'm inviting you now, right? Wow, where did that come from? So here's a little thing. Anytime you are experiencing defensiveness, that's a red flag that maybe your pathological critic is kicked in, right? Whenever you're experiencing someone else's defensiveness, which usually that experience is like, whoa, where did that come from, right? So you say something to somebody and they respond like out of the blue, you're like, wow, where did that come from? That's probably their defensiveness because whatever happened, completely unintentionally on your part, but their pathological critic kicked in. And that internal defensiveness against the pathological critic then gets externalized into our dialogue, and that defensiveness gets directed at the person that we're talking to, or gets directed at us if it's the other person's pathological critic that has become active, right? So, really, what we want to do is lower our defenses. And, I have a list. I call it my list of things that I wish I could download into people's brains. And maybe I'll do a whole video on that sometime. But one of the things that I wish I could download into people's brains is that you never, ever have to be defensive. If somebody comes up to me and they tell me that I did something wrong, and what I did was the wrong thing, I made a mistake, I don't I don't need to defend that. I don't I don't need to defend my mistakes, and I can't defend my mistakes. It was a mistake. So what do I do instead? I own it. I own it. I apologize for it. I learn from it and I move on. That's what we do with our mistakes when we have a healthy self-critic. Our healthy self-critic allows us to make mistakes, and it helps us use those mistakes as learning opportunities. So I don't need to defend mistakes that I've made. I can't. It was a mistake. Own it, learn from it, move on, right? If somebody tells me that I did something wrong and I know that it was the right thing to do, I say, okay, I don't need to defend that either, because the proof will be in the results. The proof will be in the results. So I don't need to defend when I've done something right and somebody else thinks it's wrong. The results will be the defense. I can just they're allowed to have their opinion. If they think it was the wrong thing to do, that whatever, I don't care, right? So we want to lower our defenses. And really what we want to do, and here is step one. Step one to responding in a healthy way to the pathological critic. We need to understand that the pathological critic manifests itself in our thoughts, our feelings, and our behaviors. So what we want to do, and we can only do this in reflection. So it does take that work of understanding it, right? But we want to spend that time in reflection. And the questions we want to ask ourselves is, what does my pathological critic sound like in my thoughts? What does it sound like in my thoughts? What words does it use? Right? So me, Jamie Smith, human being, sitting here talking to you, another human being, my pathological critic often tells me I'm stupid. Sometimes it will attack the idea that I'm a good husband or I'm a good father, right? But most of the time it's just telling me that I'm stupid, right? So learning to understand the thoughts that go along with the pathological critic, that's really important. And it helps us build an awareness. And when we build that awareness, we can begin to notice when it's active. And that's what we want to do. We want to be aware of what it sounds like in our thoughts so that we can notice when it's active. I'll often ask the people I work with in therapy if they can identify who their pathological critic sounds like, because the pathological critic is often an echo of those messages that we have received from other people, those primary relationships in our lives, right? So whose voice is it echoing? Who does it sound like? An interesting thing is that in our thoughts, sometimes the pathological critic uses the first person pronouns, like mine will say, I'm so stupid. And sometimes it uses second person pronouns. So sometimes my pathological critic will go, God, you're stupid, right? And it's like there's another voice inside of us that's talking to us that is separate from us. So if you're talking to yourself in a pejorative, negative, demeaning, insulting way, and you're using the second person pronouns, that's a huge red flag that it's your pathological critic talking to you. So if it's saying you're stupid, you're ugly, you're fat, you're worthless, right? Everybody would be better off without you, right? That's a huge red flag that it's a pathological critic. But just those statements, even if they're in the first person, everybody would be better off without me. I'm fat. I'm stupid. I'm ugly. I'm incompetent. That's pathological critic talk. That's what it sounds like in your thoughts. To become aware of that and to start noticing when you're having those thoughts, right? We want to notice those thoughts. We want to notice and become aware of what the pathological critic feels like in our bodies. So what do I mean by that? Emotions, all emotions, regardless of the emotion, is a sensation in the body. That's what it is. Our emotions are sensations in the body. So a lot of times this requires body scan work and the development of emotional awareness. What am I feeling in this moment? So a lot of the folks that I work with in therapy, and this is especially true of people who have experienced trauma in their lives, are extremely uncomfortable in their bodies due to the trauma that they've experienced, right? The distress that they experienced during the traumatic event caused them to detach or dissociate from their bodies, right? And so they don't feel, they go through these periods where they're not feeling their emotions. They maybe not even be feeling their own body or experiencing themselves as a person in a body, right? It's derealism, we call that. So we sometimes have to do work to get people reacquainted. We have to get reacquainted with our bodies and the feelings that we have, the emotions that we experience, because our emotions are sensations in the body. So we have to reassociate ourselves with those emotions in order for these folks to begin noticing when the pathological critic is starting to get active, because you will feel it and it'll feel very distressful. What does the pathological critic look like in our behaviors? This is another thing. Many of the folks I work with in therapy may engage in self-sabotaging behaviors, and these are things like um, self-sabotaging behaviors are things like um, addiction, self-harm, gambling, the use of pornography, maybe sexually promiscuous behavior, right? And these are self-sabotaging behaviors. The pathological critic is acting out in their behaviors, causing them to do things that lead to their own destruction, basically. And self-harm is an extreme example of that, right? But any kind of addiction, self-harm, these behaviors that destroy relationships in our lives, you know, this is the pathological critic acting out behaviorally. So, like, this would look like a person who maybe their pathological critic is constantly telling them that they're unlovable, right? So they try to get that need of feeling lovable met through sexual behaviors and sexually acting out. And so they may engage in like sexually promiscuous behaviors, which then leads them to cheat on their significant other, their boyfriend, girlfriend, spouse, whoever it may be, right? Their partner. And they cheat on that person, and then that person breaks up with them because they've cheated on them, right? So they've cheated on them, that person breaks up with them, and then that's a reinforcement that, see, I'm unlovable. But really, it all started with that sense of being unlovable, that then the pathological critic was acting out through these behaviors that were destructive of themselves and their relationship, right? So we want to develop awareness. We want to develop awareness and start noticing when the pathological critic is active. What does it sound like in our thoughts? What does it feel like in the emotions of our body? What does it act like in our behaviors? Right? We begin to notice it, and then we want to create space. We want to put an interruption in place so that when I'm thinking those thoughts, I'm feeling those feelings, or I'm acting out in those behaviors, I create space where I can self-reflect and do some of the internal work to address the pathological critic. So step one is noticing when the pathological critic is active, and then creating space for me to do the internal work of managing that pathological critic. The pathological critic was formed. So how do we respond? We're noticing, we're noticing the pathological critic is active. We're creating space, right? So that we can respond to the pathological critic effectively, right? How do we respond? The pathological critic was formed by demeaning, negating, and inconsistent messages in our primary relationships during our lives. That's how it came to be, right? When we respond to our pathological critic with messages meant to silence it, to shut it down, to negate it, to punish it, we are treating it in the same way that it was treated that created it in the first place. When we try to shut it down, silence it, punish it, we are treating it the same way that created it in the first place. And because of that, this ultimately only reinforces it, right? It ultimately only reinforces it. So people will do this. So an example of this would be like preparing this video, right? My pathological critic kicks in and says, Jamie, I don't even know why you're doing this. Why am I creating this video? Because nobody's going to watch it. Nobody's going to care. Nobody's going to want to spend time learning about this. Why are you doing this? You're wasting your time, right? And I say, well, my response is, well, I think it's kind of important. And you know what? That's all negative self-talk. I'm stupid for even thinking that. Right? And then my pathological critic, now notice what I've said, I'm stupid for even thinking that, right? And then my pathological critic responds with, yep, too stupid to be successful with this video, that's for sure. I don't even know why you're doing it, right? So then I respond, I shouldn't be thinking this way. Just think positive, right? And then my pathological critic responds, okay, I'm positive this video is going to be a complete failure, right? And then I say, just shut up, brain. And then my pathological critic says, see, I can't even apply this stuff in this video to my own self. What makes me think anybody else is going to find it useful? So you see, every time I try to respond to my pathological critic by shutting it down, shutting it up, silencing it, punishing it, right? It only gets stronger. It only gets stronger. So we need a different way to respond to the pathological critic. We're noticing, we've become aware of what it sounds like in our thoughts, what it feels like in the emotions of our body, what it acts like in our behaviors. We've become aware of those things, and we're creating space to be able to respond to it. Responding to it with those attempts to shut it down, shut it up, right? That only makes it stronger. So we need an effective way to respond to it. And the first step in responding to it effectively is acceptance mindset. The first step in responding to it effectively is acceptance mindset. So the first step is noticing it and creating the space. But after we create the space, now we want to approach the pathological critic with acceptance mindset. So what is acceptance mindset? Acceptance mindset is really made up of three things: distress tolerance, dual awareness, and non-judgmental curiosity. Distress tolerance, dual awareness, and non-judgmental curiosity. So what are these things? Distress is any strong feeling, and that includes pleasant ones. It's any strong feeling, including pleasant feelings. We have to manage, a lot of times when we talk about emotional management, people are thinking about managing our uncomfortable emotions, right? But we have to manage our comfortable emotions too. When I wake up in the morning and it's time for me to go work out and exercise and walk on the treadmill and, lift some weights, and I'm really comfortable in bed, that's a very comfortable feeling, but I have to manage it or else I'm still going to be in bed and I'm not going to work out that morning, right? So we have to manage all of our feelings. Distress is any strong feeling, including pleasant ones. So distress tolerance is being able to feel a strong emotion without reacting to it. So I'm laying in bed and man, I am comfy cozy, and I know that it's time for me to get up and go do my workout and walk on the treadmill, right? I'm not going to respond to that comfortable feeling by staying in bed. I'm going to tolerate the comfortable feeling, and I'm going to tolerate the discomfort of getting out of bed, right? That's the idea. Distress tolerance is being able to feel a strong emotion without reacting to it. This is not a static skill. This is a really important point. When we respond to distressful feelings by seeking relief of the distressful feeling, we lower our distress tolerance. And that sounds really weird. It's like, why would I want to feel distressed? Right? That's the idea. Why would I want to feel distressed? Why wouldn't I seek relief of the distress? The reason is because when we're focused on seeking comfort, we're not really dealing with the distress. We're not looking at the distress and the thing that's making us feel distressful and taking care of it. We're trying to push it aside. We're avoiding it, and that's only going to make it bigger, right? So distress tolerance is our ability to hold our own distress in our awareness and not react to it, right? To approach it differently. That's the idea. So we need to be able to hold our distress without reacting to it. Here's the good news. While it's true that immediately seeking relief lowers our distress tolerance, the opposite is also true. There are things that we can do that actually increase our distress tolerance. One of those is what we call just a sitting upright meditation. So in this meditation, what we do is we sit completely upright. We don't put our back against the chair. Many times I'll sit right on the edge of the chair, right? And I'll put my hands in my lap and I hold that posture sitting straight up, hands in my lap, both feet on the floor. It's a very uncomfortable posture to sit in, very uncomfortable. And I will sit in it and I'll set a timer, 5 minutes, 10 minutes, 15 minutes. And while I'm doing it, I'm going to focus on my breathing and I'm going to allow myself to be uncomfortable. That's what I'm going to do. I'm going to allow myself to be uncomfortable for that amount of time without seeking comfort. And that actually helps to increase distress tolerance because what we learn is that we can be uncomfortable. We don't need to seek comfort. We can be uncomfortable and we can hold that discomfort, that distress, and not react to it. Exercise is actually a terrific way to build distress tolerance, because exercise is very distressing. It's hard. If you're doing it right, it's going to be a little bit hard. Don't do it to the point of injuring yourself. There's no point in that, but it should be a little bit difficult, right? Exercise should be a little bit difficult. And when we do it and we feel that difficulty, but we don't stop, we keep going, we exercise, we keep going with our exercise, even when it's a little bit uncomfortable, not so uncomfortable that we're injuring ourselves, but a little bit just past my comfort level, right? I build distress tolerance. It's a great way to do that. So distress tolerance is the first element of acceptance mindset. Okay, so the second element of acceptance mindset is what we call dual awareness. Dual awareness is the skill needed to recognize that perception is not reality. Perception is not reality. Perception is not reality. That's one of those things I wish I could download into people's brains. Perception is not reality. Perception is perception, and reality is reality, and those two things are different. My perception can be aligned with reality, in which case I am seeing something as it really is. The other side of that coin is that my perception can be misaligned with reality, in which case I am not seeing reality as it truly is, right? When I assume that what I think and feel about something is the fact about that thing without proof beyond what I think and feel, I'm in a state that mentalization-based therapy calls psychic equivalence mode. Psychic equivalence mode is a confusion between my internal world, in which my thoughts and feelings exist, and the external world that isn't influenced by my thoughts and feelings. Right? So think about the situation where the man comes up and says, "Hey, do you got a minute?" And internally the person's going, "Great, now what did I do wrong?" Their thoughts are not aligned with the reality of what's happening. The guy that's coming up and saying, "Hey, you got a minute," wants to invite you to lunch, but your internal world is going into attack and defense mode, right? So, but if I think that this person is coming to criticize me now because that's what's going on internally, I'm in psychic equivalence mode. And I have confused my internal experience with the reality of what's going on outwardly. The only thing that's happened outwardly is that this guy's asked me if I have a minute to talk to him. You see, my thoughts and my feelings do not create reality. They do not create reality. My thoughts and my feelings are internal to me, and reality is out there. Each one of them are what they are. I am really having my thoughts and feelings, and reality is really happening out there. But the two things are not necessarily aligned. They are definitely not the same, right? So this is what dual awareness is. Dual awareness is holding in my consciousness the idea that there's something happening internally inside of me that may be misaligned with what the reality is externally, right? That's what dual awareness is. Dual awareness is recognizing that just because I feel annoyed by something doesn't mean that thing is annoying. Just because I feel betrayed by someone doesn't mean that person betrayed me. And just because raisins disgust me doesn't mean raisins are disgusting, right? That's dual awareness. What I think and feel about something is not necessarily accurate, and I need to hold in my awareness the dual realities, that reality exists apart from me and it is what it is, and I am experiencing that reality inside of me, and my experience is what it is, and these two things are not the same, and they can be misaligned. That's dual awareness. The last part of acceptance mindset is that I'm going to approach both the external reality of what's happening and my own internal experience with non-judgmental curiosity. Non-judgmental curiosity is the ability to approach my internal experience and external reality without assessment and in a spirit of compassionate understanding. Compassionate understanding for both the other person and for myself. So when the person comes up to me and says, "Hey, do you got a minute?" and it triggers my internal pathological critic, "Great, now what did you do wrong?" I'm going to approach the other person with compassionate understanding and be curious. What can I do for you? Right? I'm also going to then, in that space that I've created to be able to deal with the internal world, I'm going to actually ask the same question of my pathological critic. What can I do for you? Why are you saying this? Let me understand you. Right? We're going to get to that in a second. But we're going to approach both of these things, the external reality and my own pathological critic, with compassionate understanding, a desire to understand with compassion. So rather than trying to shut down my pathological critic, I'm going to listen to it, understand it, and respond to it with loving kindness. We're going to give a very specific type of response in just a few minutes. If I don't do that, I'm just treating my pathological critic with all of the negativity, all of the denigration, all of the insults, all of the silencing that created it in the first place. So step 2 is entering into acceptance mindset. And that requires me to be able to hold the distress I'm feeling, tolerate that distress, requires distress tolerance. The distress that I'm feeling because my pathological critic has woke up and become active. It requires me to have dual awareness that this internal experience I'm having isn't necessarily reflective of the reality externally to me, right? And I'm going to hold both of those things in my thoughts, right? In my consciousness. And it requires non-judgmental curiosity that I can approach what's going on externally and what's going on internally with compassion, with a desire to understand, right? So that's acceptance mindset. We become aware of what it feels like when it becomes active, this pathological critic, and we create space to be able to respond to it. And when we respond to it, we're going to respond to it with acceptance mindset, right? And then we're going to speak to it with loving kindness. And what does that look like? The first thing we're going to do, and this sounds really counterintuitive, it sounds almost contradictory, is we're going to agree with the pathological critic. But we're going to, what we're going to do is agree with the pathological critic contextually. So what this does is it counteracts kind of that global nature of the pathological critic's message, its accusation against me. So the pathological critic will say to me, "Man, Jamie, God, I'm so stupid," right? And that's kind of a global assessment of my being, right? And this is what the pathological critic is trying to do, right? So by agreeing with it contextually, I'm able to kind of shrink that down without negating the message. It, the pathological critic is an expression of my wounded self that wants to be acknowledged, right? So it says, "Oh, Jamie, I'm so stupid. I screwed that up," right? And then I respond to myself, "Yep, Yep, I made a mistake here. I made a mistake here. That doesn't mean I'm globally stupid, right? But I'm not going to say that. I'm just acknowledging, yep, I made this mistake here. I made this mistake here. And, right, we're going to use the word and. This is the next step, not the word but. It's not I made a mistake here, but, because I'm not defending myself. That's a very defensive thing. Yeah, I made a mistake, but I'm going to blame it on something or whatever, right? I'm going to use the word and. The word but, when we use the word but, the conjunction but in a sentence, it negates everything that came before it. We're not going to do that. We're going to use the word and. So we're going to say, yep, I made a mistake here. When my pathological critic, God, I'm so stupid. Yep, I made a mistake here, and I know how to correct it. Or, yep, I made a mistake here, and I can learn from it, right? Yep, I made a mistake here, and that's part of the learning process, right? So I'm going to say and then I'm going to give myself a compliment, or I'm going to make some kind of an affirmative statement, or maybe I'm going to engage in an act of self-nurturing. One of the things I tell folks that I work with in therapy who engage in self-harm is that the response to those urges for self-harm is self-nurturing. Whenever they feel like they want to cut themselves or burn themselves, do something that's self-destructive, do something that's self-nurturing instead. Go for a walk, work in your garden, write a poem, do something that nurtures you, right? Um, read a good book, watch a funny show, do something that nurtures you, spend time with a friend, because the response to the pathological critic, which is wanting you to hurt yourself, is to love yourself, to take care of yourself, and to take care of that pathological critic, to say, you know what, I'm going to do something nice for myself, right? I'm going to take care of myself because I'm valuable. I have worth. And I love myself. So I'm going to take care of myself. We take care of what we love, don't we? So this is how we respond to the pathological critic in a way. It doesn't silence the pathological critic. It heals the pathological critic. It helps the pathological critic heal and become that healthy self-critic that we all need. We learn to notice. We become aware of when the pathological critic is active in our feelings. What does it feel like in the emotions of my body? What does it sound like in my thoughts? What does it act like in my behaviors? We become aware of that so that when we notice that we're doing these things or feeling these things or thinking these things, we then can create space to take the next step, which is approaching the pathological critic with acceptance mindset. Holding, not holding on to, holding, just holding, attending to the distress that we feel, attending to the distress that we feel with distress tolerance, holding in our consciousness the awareness that reality exists outside of me, and I'm having this experience internally to me, and these things may be misaligned, and I need to be aware of that, right? Reality is what reality is, and my internal experience is what my internal experience is, and these two things are separated, right? I want to bring them back into alignment is what I want to do, right? But they're separated right now. I'm going to hold both of those things in my awareness, right? Dual awareness and non-judgmental curiosity. I'm going to approach the external with non-judgmental curiosity, and I'm going to approach what's going on inside of me with non-judgmental curiosity. I'm going to understand with compassion that this is an expression of my wounded self, right? The pathological critic is my wounded self. And rather than trying to shut it down, silence it, right? Kill it, what I want to do is I want to heal it. I want to make it whole, make it healthy again, right? So, and the way we do that is responding to it with loving kindness. Responding to it with loving kindness. We're going to agree with it contextually, use the word and then pay ourselves a compliment, say something affirmative, do something self-nurturing. Doing these things can heal the pathological critic inside of us, make us healthy and whole again. I hope this video has been helpful to you. If it has, I'd appreciate it if you would like it, share it. I know it's kind of long. We're getting on an hour and 20 minutes now, just past. I know it's kind of long. I hope it's been helpful to you. If it has, like, share. If you want to subscribe to my channel, that's great. I put stuff like this out occasionally. I also put some meditations out and other informational videos. So if this has been helpful to you, like, subscribe, share, do whatever, all of that social media stuff that people do these days, right? And I would appreciate that. Know that if there's anything I can do for you, please reach out. If I can do it, I will be happy to. And also know that I just wish you all the wellness in the world. I hope that you are well. I hope that all of your needs are met, and I hope for your safety. Just be well, take care of yourself, and take care of each other.